All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Champlain Valley Fruit Set meeting. We've got a good group of people here today. We're going to first hear from Dr. Robinson about how to handle thinning during the 12 millimeter window. Then we're also going to hear from our IPM specialists from the Hudson Valley and out in Western New York for their recommendations on how to deal with our insects and diseases that tend to be present in the orchard at this time. And if time allows, I'll probably also mention a little bit about weed management. So just a couple of reminders, a little bit of housekeeping before we get really rolling here. Again, if you could just double check that your microphone is muted through the PowerPoint portion of the meeting, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm going to go ahead and mute some folks as well, but you'll find that by hovering over the little toolbar near the bottom of your screen, you should be able to mute yourself. You can also pull up the chat box. If you have questions for any of the speakers during their presentation, we ask that you type them in there, and then we'll go through those at the end of their talks. We've also got a pretty small group overall today, so at the end of the PowerPoints, you'd also be welcome to unmute yourself and ask those questions directly. That's a-okay by me. With that, I think we're going to go ahead and get into some of my observations of what I've been seeing around the Champlain Valley as far as fruit set and our initial thinning discussion is concerned. So some of this initial stuff is a repeat from our petal fall meeting last week, but I thought it would be good to go through that again just to set the stage. So again, I mentioned previously that return bloom has been somewhat variable by variety in the Champlain Valley. Again, Honeycrisp has been variable, so there are certainly some on blocks, some off blocks, and then my least favorite, those blocks that have a good mix of on and off trees within the block. So we kind of run the gamut there. Fuji and New York 1, most of the blocks I've looked at are very on this year. Occasionally there might be a New York 1 block that might be a little bit lighter. And McCown, one of our other ones that can go biennial, most of those seem to be on this year as well. I also mentioned previously, but I'll repeat again, we do see a couple of off blocks in some varieties where we don't usually tend to see return bloom issues. So thinking about Gala and Pink Lady and Wild Twist, where those of you that might have that variety, I see a couple of blocks there that look like they're off, and I think that is just a remnant of a couple of locations that were hit pretty hard in 2023 with a freeze event. And so last year they probably cropped pretty heavily, and then this year they're off again. So outside of those particular blocks, when we met last week, we were talking about how we kind of had that ideal bloom period, really warm, really quick bloom. And with those days, you could really see the bees working those flowers. And I think we are seeing evidence now that fruit have had time to grow a little bit more. Fruits that, from what I've been seeing today, looks really nice across the board. Maybe some of the rat tail bloom, those, couple of laterals on New York 1 that always open up a bit later, they might not have set as well. But when you look at the actual clusters on the spurs across most of the varieties in the Champlain Valley, it looks like things have set very, very nicely. King's laterals all look really strong, so certainly a lot of thinning work for us to do. Another thing that I wanted to just point out, a few people did use ammonium thiosulfate or ATS as a bloom thinner this year. I think we had really good conditions for that material to have a really strong efficacy this year. It went on mostly under pretty hot conditions, sort of upper 70s, low 80s. So where that material was used, I think this was one of the years where we probably saw the better side of efficacy with it. And so with that, where it was used, I think we've been able to reduce that initial fruit load quite a bit, and you'll see more of that on the next slide that I'm going to share. Petal fall thinners, depending on location, I think at least in Peru, probably a good amount of petal fall thinning was done at the tail end of the petal fall window. So a couple of folks were getting out Monday, Tuesday with their applications, maybe even a little bit yesterday. So I think with that in mind, we haven't seen the full effects of those applications yet. So it'll probably be early next week where we can really see the effects of that, really see the differentiation further of what's going to be staying versus what's going to be falling off. But with that in mind, I did go through Peru today and looked at multiple varieties around town just to get a sense of where I think things are kind of moving and shaking out at this point. And of course, that is subject to change depending on how that petal fall chemical reacts for us. But generally speaking, you can see where variety sizes is shaking out at this point in time. Pretty variable, anywhere from 6 millimeters on the low side when you look at varieties like New York 1, Gala, up to a couple kings that are getting fairly large at this point, particularly Honeycrisp and Max. They're approaching 11 millimeters in a couple of cases. But for the most part, things are probably averaging somewhere in that 7 to 9 range. Then when we look at the number of fruit that are remaining in the clusters, I did want to separate those out depending on if they were treated with that ATS at bloom or not, just because we are seeing some pretty big differences in different varieties there. So where we didn't use ATS, where we used either NAA or no bloom thinner, looking at Honeycrisp, I was seeing about 3 to 5 fruits per cluster today. Gala also about 3 to 6, and New York 1 4 to 5. Max were all over the board, anywhere from very very low fruit remaining up to a full set of 5. Cortland's 2 to 5, McCown's 1 to 6. Fuji still pretty strong at 4 to 5, and then Pink Lady and Evercrisp anywhere from 1 to 4, 2 to 5. So really kind of depends on the block. Then when we look at the blocks where the ATS has been used, again, we got a good amount of thinning out of those. In a couple of those blocks, I'm seeing anywhere from clusters completely wiped out, so 0 remaining, a good amount of singles, and a couple where we might still have 3 or 4. New York 1, very similar. I think where ATS was used on New York 1 this year, we had really, really strong results from that. So there we're seeing a lot better down to singles, doubles, really strong thinning there. McCown 0 to 3, Fuji 0 to 4, and Pink Lady 0 to 3 as well. So that's what we're seeing at this point, Terrence. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you to discuss your recommendations for the 12 millimeter applications.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I'll get started with some discussion about what to do now that we're going to be entering the window for the 10 to 13 millimeter spray shortly. We're not quite there yet, and it's interesting that fruits have been growing relatively slowly. Even in Western New York, we still can't quite get to the 10 millimeter stage. But let's talk about what you should think about doing over the next week. So it's important to recognize that this particular spray should be one of several sprays, if hopefully it's not the first spray for you. And if you put on a bloom spray and a petal fall spray, then you potentially could take it easier on this spray. But for the most part, I think even with bloom and petal fall spray, you're still going to need a significant thinning effort and relatively high rates, because the end of the story, the punchline is that we're not looking at very good conditions for effective thinning. Even though we have, I think, just a beautiful crop out there with no frost damage this year, good bee flag, good fruit set. The problem is that petal fall spray went on in relatively cool conditions with a carbohydrate surplus, and it likely is to give poor thinning. Now, last week I gave the recommendation to put in some extra carbaryl in the spray. And if you get some more rain, say tomorrow, and you put that carbaryl on Monday and you get a little more rain tomorrow, you'll get some more uptake of the carbaryl tomorrow, and that will help. But still, the carbohydrate balance is such that I think the trees won't really sense the stress enough to shed fruit. Now, the unfortunate part of the story is that this coming spray is likely to go on in similar conditions with a carbohydrate surplus, and that will give moderate thinning. Thus, for the most part, I think you need aggressive rates. Now, the places you might consider not being aggressive is where you can see clear results from the ATS that went on under relatively warm conditions. And that would be beautiful because that's the whole intention of that blossom spray with ATS is to first prune so you don't have too many buds, but secondly, to knock off all the laterals and leave just one king flower there. And then the thinning after bloom is much simpler. But if you're still facing 3 or more flowers per cluster, you're still going to need a substantial amount of thinning. Now, I want to echo what Mike said. You cannot yet see the results of a petal fall spray that went on Monday or Tuesday. And that's unfortunate because you'll probably need to come back in Monday or Tuesday with another spray, and it won't be so easy and clear to determine how much you got from that. But nevertheless, it seems to me that you're still going to need to be quite aggressive in that upcoming spray early next week. I'd like to sort of preview what I'm seeing as far as the carbohydrate model. On the top part of this chart, I show the daily or 6-day average graph. And it's interesting that although bloom happened fairly quick, in this case, I put bloom in the Peru area at May 13th for max. The petal fall window didn't open up until somewhere around May 20th and went all the way into this early this week of Monday and Tuesday. But when we look forward, the real big window of the 10 to 13, the real window for the big spray of 10 to 13 millimeters won't really occur until at the earliest Saturday, but more likely Sunday or Monday. Now we have a relatively wide window of degree days to put that spray on. And if you look down at the bottom part of the chart, I put in just those averages for the day of the upcoming Saturday, 31st, Sunday, June 1st, Tuesday, June 2nd, Wednesday, June 3rd. And you'll see that we're entering the window on the 31st, and we'll continue with that probably through June 4th. And if you look at what's coming up, we're going to have this period of relatively high daily carbohydrate balances. And when we calculate a 6-day average moving forward, probably the 30th tomorrow will be decent in terms of carbohydrates. But after that, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, I predict they're going to be relatively poor thinning conditions. The weather might be okay, but the trees won't have any deficit to help us. I want to remind you all that yes, at this timing, the 10 to 13 millimeter fruit size, all thinners have a relatively strong effect and are usually quite effective. But the carbohydrate model is telling us that we're in a surplus carbohydrate period, which will mute the response and give relatively poor thinning. So what can you do? Well, the value of the carbohydrate model is to help you both adjust the timing and the rate. I put in just that little caution that if for whatever reason we got really serious deficits of less than -50, you wouldn't want to spray. That would give over thinning. But this year, the carbohydrate surplus that we're seeing will call for increasing your rate by 15 to 30%, depending on how positive the carbohydrate balance is. And then we can adjust timing a bit. Now, the timing starts, the window starts for Peru Saturday. But I would say wait until next week. Wait until the latter part of the window before spraying, which would be Tuesday or Wednesday. I want to give you my recommendations for a number of varieties. At this timing, the combinations of either NAN carbaryl or Maxell BA carbaryl are the best. We've also had good success if you don't want to use Carbaryl with Maxell and NAA, and more recently we've had really good success with Maxell and Exceed. Now, I'll make a couple of comments here about Exceed. One is that it's a relatively weak thinner, and we have not been very successful using it as a single chemical thinning program. I know that Valent is pushing that a little bit, and you had a separate meeting, a Valent meeting in the Champlain a few weeks ago. But both my data in Geneva and in Wayne County in New York and Mike's data shows that it's not very strong. The only time we've made it really work well is when we combine it with Maxell. Now, we're probably not going to meet again. If by chance fruits get big and you still have way too many fruits on the tree, that's what I would suggest. That's what's worked the best for us when fruits are 16 or 15, 16, 17, 18 millimeters, and we realize we've got way too many apples. This happens mostly on Gala, but Maxell and Exceed has been the best thing that we've been able to use at that timing. Now, I will add that there's a new thinner that is currently in the process of being labeled. We didn't get it in time in New York for this year, called Brevis, that also will work at relatively large fruit sizes. So we'll be talking about that and Maxell and Exceed next year as if we get into the situation of too many fruit at 16 millimeters. Now, specific variety recommendations. What I really like with Gala is the Maxell 7. Here, I'm recommending a relatively high rate of Maxell because it's going to be not that great of thinning conditions. And again, another 2 pints of the 7. For Honeycrisp, to avoid biennial bearing, you've got to use also a relatively high rate of NAA, the 3-ounce rate, and the 2 pints of 7. Whereas with Macintosh, and listening to Mike, you might even be a little more cautious, but just the moderate rate of 2 ounces of NAA on a tree row volume dilute basis. And the 2 pints of 7, I think, will do a great job with Macintosh. Empire responds well to the high rate of Maxell with the 2 pints of 7. Now, both Spur Delicious, Red Delicious, and Fuji don't do well with NAA programs, tend to produce pygmy fruit. Probably not many Delicious grown in the Champlain and not many Fujis, but if you have either of those varieties, use the high rate of Maxell. Now, New York 1 has responded well to both an NAA-based program and a Maxell-based program, but I like the Maxell-based program because it gives slightly larger fruit size. It's not the highest rate of Maxell. It's basically what I call a 3/4 rate. That's a 48 ounces on a tree row volume dilute basis and 2 pints of 7. New York 2 or Ruby Frost, I like a low, medium rate of NAA on a tree row volume basis with some 7. Now, with those sorts of generalized recommendations for varieties, let me show you what we would do in terms of putting the right amount of chemical in the sprayer. It's essential with chemical thinners to get the right number of micrograms of chemical on the leaf. And that really depends a lot on how much water spray you put out there versus how big the trees are. So we always calculate tree row volume when we do thinning sprays. You don't have to spray a full dilute spray. Suppose the new high density orchard measures 150 gallons for a dilute spray. You don't have to spray 150 gallons. You can spray half of that or a third of that even. But let's just suppose for this example, we calculate the tree row volume to be 150 gallons for a dilute spray, but we're only spraying half of that. We're spraying 75 gallons. Therefore, our concentration factor is 150 divided by 75 equals to 2. We have to use that in determining how much chemical goes in the tank. So if we take my suggested rate for Honeycrisp, which was the 3 ounces per 100 dilute, we really should be using 1.5 hundreds dilute, but since we're not spraying that much water, we're only spraying half of the water, we're going to concentrate it by 2. So the 3 ounces become 6 ounces per 100, and then there's 5 of those in a sprayer, so times 5 is 30 ounces per spray tank. The same story can be calculated with Maxell. My high rate of Maxell for Gala is 64 ounces, but the concentration factor is 2. That makes 128 ounces or a full gallon per 100 gallons times 5 of these. So you're going to dump 5 gallons of Maxell in the sprayer to go spray Gala. Now, because this year we've had this problem with carbohydrate surpluses at both the pedal fall and now at the 10 to 13 millimeters, predicted that's what it's going to be. And by the way, I'll just pause and say, run the carbohydrate model Monday before you spray, just to make sure it still turns out like I'm expecting it to. But because of that situation, the 2 pints of 7 will help, especially since we've got this rainy spring where we get a little bit of rain every few days. So in this case, 2 pints per 100 times the 500, we don't use a concentration factor with 7. That gives 10 pints to the sprayer tank, or a gallon and a half. Now, for this spray, I think it's essential to nozzle the sprayer to put most of the spray in the top of the tree. We've done a number of studies over the years, and what we like the best is to put 75% of the spray in the top half of the tree and only 25% in the bottom. If you sprayed a pedal fall spray, you probably got the bottoms thin pretty good. And so most of the spray going to the top will help even out that pattern of distribution of fruit in the tree. And if you end up in a situation where you need to spray an 18 millimeter spray, which I would like to suggest should be Maxell and Exceed, then spray only the top half of the tree. Now, the issue of regulate is one that I've kind of introduced a new way to consider that about 3 years ago, and I repeat it here. And that is, on years when we have a carbohydrate surplus, you should include regulate if you're using NA. On years when we have a deficit, then we should not include regulate as a surfactant. But this year, I would suggest put a pint of regulate in your spray tank. It'll help increase the effectiveness of NAA on a year when we're expected to get only moderate thinning out of our thinning sprays. So let me summarize what I think in terms of this year in the Champlain Valley. Now, the best timing based on degree days, I put 3 time windows down here. For Will down in Crown Point, I estimate that the window opens up today and goes through Tuesday, June 3rd, before the fruits will start to get too big. However, for Peru, the main area, I think the window doesn't open till Saturday and doesn't close, well, never really closes, but let's say the best window would close on Wednesday. I suggest you wait till the latter part of that, Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. Now, I don't know exactly the wind speed or how much rainfall we'll get on Tuesday or Wednesday. You'll have to decide, but I think there's 3 possible days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and pick the best one of those to spray. For Chazy, I ran that one and it's further behind, and so I don't think the window really opens up till Tuesday, but certainly goes all the way through Friday, June 6th. Now, I repeat this again, that the cool weather, relatively modest sunshine, will give carbohydrate surpluses and poor thinning. So my suggestions are wait till the end of the thinning window. That's Tuesday or Wednesday, assuming one of those days is good to spray. High temperatures are predicted to be in the upper 60s and low 70s. So that's not 80, it's not 75. And that lower temperature will give us more moderate thinning. They should result in decent thinning, but not aggressive thinning with either NAA or Maxell. So I'm predicting mild thinning, thus you should use a full rate of NAA and put 2 pints of Carbaryl per 100 and use regulate at 1 pint per 100. Now, if you're growing Gala in the Champlain Valley, you absolutely need this spray because it's almost always the case that that variety sets up way too heavy and we can't thin it adequately without a pretty decent response on this timing. With other varieties, Macintosh, you should look at the trees. Possibly, if you had a ATS plus a petal fall thinner, you might essentially have completed your thinning. Now with Empire, I think you absolutely have to spray this one, and Honeycrisp almost always, and McCowan, those more difficult ones. And then Cortland, this is generally when we get a really decent response with Cortland. So I think all those varieties would probably need a spray right now, except possibly Macintosh, unless you really haven't done anything with Max yet, then you're definitely going to need this spray. I end with just a summary, a reminder, I guess, that maybe in about 2 weeks, we'll need to start this series of ethereal sprays. I say 2 weeks because fruits are growing slow. Now, if we get really nice weather and get up into the 80s and fruits take off, it might be a week and a half. But about the time fruits get to be 16 millimeters, in your cover sprays, add some ethereal, a half dose on the first one. If fruits are less than 25 millimeters, it's a half dose because we don't want more thinning. And then after fruits are 25 millimeters, a full dose of ethereal once a week or every 10 days. But that should take you in the Champlain Valley up to about the 10th of July for your last ethereal spray. And that has tended to work fairly well for us at Geneva. Mike did a little trial with us last year at Adam Sullivan's, and it seemed to also help there for return bloom on honeycrisp. And so we'd recommend that. So with that, I'll stop and be happy to talk about specific questions or varieties that you might want to address before we'll turn it over to others to talk about other topics.
All right, thank you very much, Terrence. At this point, we'll go ahead and open things up. If people have questions, you can type them into the chat box. You're also welcome to unmute yourself and ask Terrence directly. And I'm happy to start out. Terrence, for 12 millimeters on McCown, do you prefer Maxell or NAA? I see they're both listed in the guidelines. And if our temps are about 70 next week, which one would you go with?
So if temperatures are in the 70s, even low 70s, I prefer Maxell and 7. And this is work we did a number of years ago, and Jim Shoup also did similar work in the Hudson Valley, where we got the best size. If this type, we put an NAA 7 spray on it, petal fall, which is traditional for McCown, but we went with Maxell and 7 at this timing. So that's what I would suggest for McCown.
All right, thank you. We do have more and more Pink Lady and Evercrisp in the Champlain Valley too, so I was wondering what you recommend for your rates for those two varieties at this timing.
So Pink Lady thins relatively easy. I like to thin it like I do Macintosh, 2 ounces of NA with, in this case, not 2 pints of 7, just 1 pint of 7. Evercrisp is an odd duck in the sense that it often thins itself, almost to not needing thinning, and often we over thin it with any thinner. So I said at the in-depth school in March, maybe I already said this last week, I don't recall, but it does produce ethylene around bloom and petal fall, mostly around petal fall. And that ethylene causes a natural thinning response, like Sweet Tango, which also has a natural thinning response. And so I've said, don't put any blossom thinner on Evercrisp. Don't put a petal fall thinner on Evercrisp. But at this timing, if you go out there and you're still looking at 4 to 5, and it also depends on what kind of bloom you had, because Evercrisp tends to produce on tips. But if it has tip bloom plus spur bloom, then I would thin it. But if it only has blossoms on the ends of shoots or ends of short shoots, I probably wouldn't thin it at all at the 12 millimeter. If I did thin it, I would put a relatively low dose, 1 ounce of NAA and a pint of 7.
Okay, great, thank you. See, we have a question from Jesse popping up. If we feel the tops of the trees are heavy and the bottoms have thinned down well, can I just shut off the bottom half of my nozzles, recheck my output and spray the tops?
Absolutely. And that's what we have done uh, in these studies. So just basically, we keep the output the same, 75 gallons to the acre, but all going out through the top nozzles. And it's worked extremely well when we think the bottoms are thin. And so that's a great question, and it's exactly what I would do, Jesse.
All right, great, thank you. We also had a question come in regarding Max on M7 rootstock, so more of a semi-dwarf. Um, and thinking about the TRV and the concentration factor, how far up would you concentrate your NAA in that situation on an M7 rootstock.
So I want to first preface it by saying that M7 does thin easier than M9 or B9 or G11 or G41 or any of the G stocks. And so these semi-dwarf trees, which have gone out of favor, can thin easier and lower doses will do the job. If it's a fully grown M7, and Mike and I talked previous to the meeting about this, and I don't know all the details, but let's just assume it's a fully grown M7 and the full tree row volume is 250 gallons the acre. But let's suppose you're only spraying 50 gallons. That's a fifth of the water. And so you would then concentrate your spray 5 times in that tank. That is a little bit scary to me. We've done studies where we put on half the water. Let's just suppose it's 250. Half the water would be 125 gallons of water. A third of the water would be what? About 80 gallons to the acre. A fourth of 250 would be 60 gallons. And I'm willing to go that for, 1/4 the water. But I would much prefer to spray half the water or a third of the water. And so my suggestion would be on those M7s, spray 125 gallons to the acre and put on 2 ounces of NAA per tree row volume dilute, which means that in each 100 gallons in the sprayer, it would be 4 ounces, and 4 times 5, it'd only be 20 ounces in the spray tank of a 500-gallon sprayer, spraying 125 gallons to the acre. Maybe you don't want to carry that much water. Go down to 100, but calculate the tree row volume and what's the concentration factor, and then do it that way.
Okay, great. Thanks, Terrence. So just as a follow-up with that, is there a max concentration you would consider going up to, like a 3x or?
Yeah, I've often said I've considered 4x, but my preference is really 2 or 3x. So just use 3x if you don't want to carry so much water. So one spray, you don't have to carry that much water with insecticides or fungicides, but this one spray, put it on no more concentrate than 3x.
All right, thank you. All right, any other thinning questions from Terrence before we move on to our next speaker? I see Dan has unmuted himself. Oh, might have accidentally hit it. All right. Well, not seeing anything else, I think we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you very much, Terrence. We appreciate your suggestions for us.
Good luck, everybody.
Thank you. All right, so next up, we are going to shift, and our next speaker is going to be Andres Antolinas from the Hudson Valley Research Lab, giving us some information about how we can manage the insects that are out in the orchard at this time of year.
Thank you, Mike. I'm gonna try to start sharing my screen. So let me know if you guys are seeing the presentation now.
That looks good, and we can hear you. You should be all set.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. And today I would like to make some comments about how the season is looking for us in the Hudson Valley in terms of insects. And based on that, I will give my impression for the Champlain Valley. So I will start talking about plum curculio, then I will talk about 2 aphids, rosy apple aphid and woolly apple aphid. Then I will talk about apple leaf curling midge, which is an important problem in the Champlain Valley. And finally, I will talk about a little bit about lepidopterans. So I will start with plum curculio because plum curculio is the king in this time of the year, is the one who drives all management recommendations. So things that probably you already know. You know that adults migrate in spring when temperatures are between 55 and 60. Also, you probably know already that oviposition starts at petal fall, and that's basically after 1 or 2 warm evenings around 60 Fahrenheit. And that for successful management, you need to provide protection from petal fall to the end of the oviposition period, which is typically when you reach 308-degree days using degree day model base 50 Fahrenheit. So this season, I have been monitoring plum curculio since the beginning of the season. So I deployed these tethered traps with lures in different crops. So I am monitoring in apples and also in stone fruits. So I was able to capture the first plum curculios of the season. So you know that plum curculio starts arriving before petal fall, but then starts making damage at petal fall. So this year, the first detection of plum curculio in the Hudson Valley was in April 24. And then we started seeing the insects causing damage right in petal fall. So in this slide, I have the number of insects per trap in our different sampling dates. And you see that there has been like an increase in the number of insects and then some decreases in the captors. And actually in the next slide, I'm gonna show you that that's related with the temperature. So in this slide, we have in the left side, the average temperature, and in the right side, we have the insect activity. So that's the number of insects per trap that we capture. So you will see that in each color, we have the different weeks where we sample. So this red bar represents the first week. That was a short week, actually. So in that first week, we had an average temperature of 60 Fahrenheit. And that's when we started seeing the first insects in our traps. Then the next week, here in this green area, we had temperatures around 63 Fahrenheit. And then in the traps, we observed the highest captors. But then in the next week, here in gray, we have a temperature of 58. So there is a decrease in the temperature, and also there is a decrease in the number of curculio activity. So we didn't catch insects that week. The next week, we had an increase in temperature. So we had 65 on average. And as you see here in the traps, we have an increase as well in insect activity. And the next week, we had again a decrease in the temperature. So we had 52 on average. And we can see here a decrease in insect activity as well. So as we see in this comparison of the two graphics, plum curculio, it's affected by temperatures, and activity depends on temperature. So this is like a really cool way to see when the insect is active depending on the temperature. So I think I can do also this correlation with damage, but I don't have the complete data for damage in order to like do something similar to this comparison. But I think probably damage could be also correlated with insect activity and temperature. So always remember that when there are variations in temperature, there are also going to be variations in the activity of the insect, specifically if it is plum curculio. So now let's talk about some management considerations for this season. So I will show you basically our spray program for plum curculio. So we had petal fall here in between May 5 and May 6. So we did our initial petal fall spray. But then we had to spray on May 12th, just 75 degree days later, because we had more than 2 inches of rain. So those 2 inches of rains almost wash off the residue. So we had to reapply just 6 days before the first application, after the first application. And then in May 23, when we had 190 degree days, we did our cover spray. So right now, we have accumulated only 236 degree days. So according to the forecast of the NUA model, probably we're gonna reach the 308 degree days in June 3. And that is more than 28 days in terms of degree days. So probably for us, this is going to be very close to be a 3 spray season if we don't take into account the reapplication that we did because of rain. So this season for us is a long season for plum curculio management that probably will imply 3 applications. So as I mentioned, according to NUA, we will reach the 308 degree days in June 3. But yeah, I don't know at this time if I should trust in the forecast, but we're trying here to reach the 308 degree days soon, because this season has been long for us. So for some management recommendations, this year I have been testing different insecticides. So for plum curculio management, we have different insecticides in different groups that could be very effective. So I have these underlined in red, the ones that gives you the highest activity or the highest efficacy. So we have imidan, and we have diamides such as verdeprine. We have neonics such as Actara. We have Abont, which is a very good product. We have another diamide, which is Exirel. And as I told you, I am testing this season insecticides against plum curculio. And I have found that also some pyrethroids, for example, Warrior 2, they give you a very good control. And actually, the control of Warrior 2 is similar to the control of Actara, which is one of the best insecticides in order to control plum curculio. I am also testing 2 different compounds that are not labeled for plum curculio. One of them is spearlep. Spearlep is a material that is for lepidopterans, but some people have observed some efficacy in terms of plum curculio control. So what I have seen so far is that it has some suppression activity, but it's not going to give you the best protection. And I am also testing a new compound that is going to be probably released next year. And that insecticide, I cannot say the name yet because I don't want to deal with a lawsuit with the company. But that product is a completely different mode of action, and is going to give you probably good control for plum curculio according to what I am seeing in the field. And also it's an insecticide that is going to give you good control for lepidopterans. So that's a pretty cool material that maybe we will have available next year. You can also use mixes for plum curculio. So you can use Bolian flexi, which is a mix between Altara and Altacor. And also you can use Besich, which is a mix between Altacore and Warrior 2. One thing that has been important for us is the rain this season. And because of that, I would like to remind you that the rain fastness of the insecticides vary. That depends on the compound and on the amount of rain you receive. So in this chart, we have the rain fastness of different insecticides, different insecticide classes. And also we have the rain fastness depending on the amount of rain you receive. So if you have less than 1 inch of rain, more than 1 inch of rain, and more than 2 inches of rain. And you have the rain fastness for fruits and for leaves. So one thing important here is that this group of organophosphates, pyrethroids, and carbamates, they have between moderate to low rain fastness. So if you guys use imidan, Sevin, Warrior, Mustang Max, or Asana, those products are not going to be the best ones in order to resist the rain. The best ones are going to be actually the neonicotinoids, for example, Actara, and also the diamides, for example, Exirel and verdeprine. Those insecticides have the best rain fastness because of the mode of action they have. So neonics, you know that they are systemic. So once they go inside the tissues, they are protected from the rain. And diamides, they have translaminar activity, which means that they can also go inside the tissues. So that's why they have better rain fastness than other products. So in a season like this one, where we're having rain almost every day, it's very handy to have this chart at hand, because the decision of the insecticide you use probably will depend on how resistant it is to the water. So now let's see the forecast for the Champlain Valley. So it looks like you're gonna have a rainy week coming. The good news is that you're gonna have less than 0.0 inches of rain. So according to this chart we were seeing, if you receive less than 0.0 inches of rain, probably the majority of the compounds that we use, even pyrethroids or imidan, they can last, and there are going to be enough residues with that amount of rain. The problem would be probably if you reach more than 1 inch of rain. If you reach more than 1 inch of rain, probably you will need to start thinking in reapplications. And this is the forecast for June for the Champlain Valley for the Plattsburgh area. So in the first week of June, it looks like you guys are going to have some rain, but also high temperatures. So you're going to be over 70 Fahrenheit. So plume curculio activity in those conditions may be high. So be sure to maintain the fruits protected, especially during these warm weeks. But because of these high temperatures, you're going to see these high temperatures in the next weeks. I believe that that will shorten the plum curculio season for you guys. So probably, according to those temperatures, maybe you're going to reach the 308-degree days in just 2 sprays. So it will be probably different to what we saw in the Hudson Valley. So now let's switch gears to a group of insects that I have been seeing active. Especially I have been seeing rosy apolaphids since type cluster pink. You know that roses, they hide very well. They curl the leaves, so they are always hiding in the interior of those curled leaves. So sometimes they are difficult to see. And when you see the leaf curling, probably the damage is already done. They are really small. And the first detection this year, at least in the Hudson Valley, was around pink. So some options for management are rosy apolaphids, especially if you have problems at petal fall. So the proper management of rosy apolaphids, if it starts pre-bloom. But if you have problems right now, if you start seeing the leaf curling, you can spray, and that spray will provide you suppression. We use a good combination of Actara. In the research station, we had some problems with rosy apolaphid at petal fall. So we applied Actara with the advantage that Actara was going to give us also protection to Plum curculio. So we killed 2 birds with 1 stone. However, be careful if you use the option of Actara for Plum curculio and rosy apolaphid, because if you are in a place where you have high incidence of oriental fruit moth, your fruits are not going to be protected just with Actara. So you will need to include something else in order to cover the Lepidopterans, because Actara doesn't have activity for Lepidopterans. Another insect also active in the Hudson Valley, it's woolly apolaphid. We detected woolly apolaphid at petal fall. However, this year has been different to last year. So last year they appeared early as well, and they started growing very fast. So this year they appeared probably at the same time, but they are not growing that fast. So we don't have the same amount of colonies in the trees if we compare to last year. So the development has been slower, but anyway, they are present. Remember that for woolly apolyphid is very important, the monitoring. So especially this monitoring at petal fall, you need to look for the first colonies on pruning wounds, and especially in the lower part of the tree. So close to the rootstock, you're gonna start seeing the colonies there, and then the colonies are gonna go progressing to the more upper parts of the canopy. So then you will start seeing the colonies in the leaf axils. And then probably the last stage is gonna be to see the fruit clusters infested. So the key here is to control the insect before you see these clusters infested. So you don't have, or you don't want to deal with the honeydew of the woolies. So that's the key, to have the populations as low as possible. So for the Champlain Valley, this is a graphic of the population abundance of woolly apolyphid for the Champlain Valley in 2024. So you guys have a very different population density than us in the Hudson Valley. We in the Hudson Valley, we have two different population peaks. You guys only have one. So for you guys, the populations are gonna probably start rising in the second week of June, and then you're gonna reach the highest values in July. So I think that for management in the Champlain Valley, your treatment time should be before the first week of June, so before these populations start growing up. So remember that the key is always to spray when you have low populations, and especially if you have products like Movento, that they take time to start working. The good thing about Movento is that even though it's slow in order to start killing the insects, it's gonna give you a long residual period. So probably it's gonna give you between 2 and 3 weeks of protection. So if you can afford the application of Movento, that's probably a very good option for woolly apolyphid management. And in your case, probably the management is a little bit more easy than for us in the Hudson Valley, because you guys only have one peak. So if you get rid of this population peak, probably you're gonna be fine in terms of woolly apolyphid. We have a secondary peak that is at the end of the season, so probably for us we will need more application, but maybe a very well-timed application for you guys before you reach the highest values is probably enough for the Champlain Valley. Options for woolly apolyphid management, you can spray different insecticides, but there are different efficacies. So the most effectives are Movento or Sensar, which actually is a combination between Movento and Steam, and also diazinon. Diazinon is always the last option because it's toxic and also kills absolutely everything, including natural enemies. You have also some softer options that probably are better for pre-bloom. So you can apply Steam. There is a double 2E for woolly apolyphids, so probably in a spray program for woolly apolyphid, you should apply these softer molecules pre-bloom, and then you can go with Demovento, or you can also apply neonics at petal fall. So neonics, the efficacy of them, they vary. So in some insecticide efficacy trials, I have seen they work almost at the same level as Movento, and in some of them they are not that effective. So I think that the problem for neonics is even though they work, because they have less residual activity than Movento, probably that's the reason why you see the differences in efficacy in different studies. So I have tried a sale for woolly apolyphid, and it gives you suppression. But the key here is to apply when the population is not that high. So if you wait until seeing the honeydew probably a sale is going to give you poor protection because the population is just so high that you're not going to control it with a neonic. However, with a very well-timed application, the neonics are a very good option. And also the advantage is that they are affordable. They are not as expensive as Momento or Sensor, for example. Sensor is also a really expensive material. So let's switch gears now to leaf curling midge. This insect is always prevalent in the Champlain Valley area, but in the most recent seasons, it's becoming more prevalent in the Hudson Valley. We have not reached the levels you guys see there, but definitely we see probably more and more leaf curling. So I think this is probably going to be a problem that is going to hit us in the future, especially if we lose some insecticides. Maybe we will see resurgence of leaf curling midge in this area of the Hudson Valley. So the first detections of leaf curling midge was 429 in Clinton, 5.6 in Geneva, and 428 in Niagara Lake. For leaf curling midge management, is important to know that they have 3 generations per year. So one is around June, the second one is around late July, and the last one is around late August. For management, is key to control the first 2 generations. And if you have high infestations, those high infestations can cause up to 80% of terminal damage. So if the infestation is severe, the damage to the terminal, it could be quite significant. And similar to the leaf curling with rosy apple aphid, once you see the galls or the leaf curled, it is too late to apply. So actually what people do is to try to monitor for egg laying. So the eggs are these very, very tiny balls that you see here in this photo. So if you see in the very first and young tissue, these egg depositions, probably you have 1 week in order to apply an insecticide to get effective control. And for management, there is a degree day that has been developed in Canada, but I don't know how effective would be for us in New York. So if we want to use a degree day, or if we want to try to deal with a degree day model, we will need to calibrate the degree day for us. So that's probably something I would like to do in the next season. So I would like to start probably working with this insect because there is almost no information about leaf curling midge and management. So options for leaf curling midge, there are pyrethroids. So the thing here with leaf curling midge is that if you see the labels, you're not gonna see leaf curling midge almost in any label of these products. But because of the experience people have in Canada dealing with leaf curling midge, I know that they work. So basically you have pyrethroids, active ingredients like acetacypermethrin, they could be effective. So that means Mustang Max could be effective. Also probably Warrior 2. The gold standard for leaf curling midge in Canada, where they have been dealing with this problem for some years, is Movento. And if you check the Cornell guidelines, the only recommendation for leaf curling midge that you're gonna see is Exirel. There is also efficacy on delegate and also a sale. So for leaf curling management, what the Canadians recommend is pyrethroids application pre-bloom, and then you do a petal fold application for Movento. And then you can control the second generation with products such as Exirel or Delegate. And actually, you don't control the third generation because that generation is not usually controlled because the fruit is already formed. So there is almost no damage caused by the third generation. So the key is always the first and the second. And if you don't control well the first one, the second generation is going to be higher and worse than the first one. So it's something that you need to take into account in your spray program always, especially if you have high incidence of this insect. Let's switch to the last one of today. So codling moth, I have seen a lot of activity here, but if we compare to the activity we had last year, we have been seeing less codling moth this year. So we saw codling moth in the Hudson Valley since the beginning of May, but because of the low temperatures and also because of the rain, we have been seeing low numbers, and according to the degree day models, we haven't reached yet the degree days needed for insecticide application. So it has been also a long season for us in terms of codling moth. Remember that the target time to control, well, the first capture for Peru was actually this week. Let's see if the next week we can have sustained captures in order to establish the biofix. And the target time for control for the first generation larva is between 220 and 250 degree days. And for effective control, you usually spray 2 times your first application, then a second application 10 to 14 days after. So options for codling moth management, Altacore, which is an excellent product, also a Bond, Exirel, and a Sale. And there are organic options such as Entrust or the Cidex virus. And also, of course, mating disruption, at least in the Hudson Valley area, we always receive a lot of damage caused by codling moth. I know that you guys probably don't receive the same damage we have, and you probably rarely see codling moths in your traps. But for us in the Hudson Valley, it's a significant and prevalent pest. And one that is really important for you guys is oblique banded leaf roller. The first flight of oblique banded leaf roller is typically in June. We haven't seen the first insects in the Hudson Valley. And the second flight is in August. So the control time, it's between 360 and 460 degree days, base 45. And options for control, you have BT products such as Javelin. You have diamides, they are excellent for oblique banded leaf roller control, for example, Altacore, Exirel, and Verdeprine. And you have spinosins, Delegate, and Entrust. And you have the premixes such as Besich, Boliam, and Minectopro. I finish here. One special mention I would like to say is we're having also problems in the Hudson Valley this year with black stem borer. I have seen multiple reports of infestations, and that is probably because of the combination between rain. So you know that they feel attracted to trees that are stressed. So if your trees are young and they are growing in flooded areas, they are going to start producing ethanols, and that will attract the black stem borer. Probably one positive thing about the rain is that even though it contributes to the flooding, the insects don't fly in the rain, so they need some windows of time in order to start attacking the tree. Unfortunately, for black stem borer control, we don't have a lot of options. So if you check the Cornell recommendations, you're gonna see only Warrior 2 and Danitol. So the management basically is try to time the applications with the flight of the insect. Right now, we are like in the middle of the time when they should be flying. So if you have susceptible trees, probably is a good option in to start thinking in some preventive trunk sprays of Danitol or Warrior. I have been testing a third compound that, according to what I have seen, according to some studies I did last year, has good efficacy, at least comparable to Danitol, and that compound is Proclaim. That's a group 6 insecticide. So I am doing more tests this season in order to confirm the efficacy of the compound and also in order to check if I can find a good combination between an adjuvant in order to find what's the most effective adjuvant in order to maintain protection. What I found last year was that the product is effective, but the residuality is not super long, so it will give you 1 week of protection. But if we talk about Danitol, according to what I saw, also Adanitol can give you the same amount of protection for 1 week. So I would like to find good combinations between adjuvants to see if we can extend this residuality project, this residuality effect, to see if we can protect better the trees from black stem borer. And I think with that, probably I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much, Andres. Really informative talk. If you have any questions for Andres, you're welcome to type those into the chat box, or you can also unmute yourself and ask him directly. I did have a question for you. A grower asked me the other day, you were here for Terrence's portion. A few people probably have gone out and put on a quart of carbaryl at this point for their thinning. Do you feel like that should at least get them through, the week as far as Plum Coolio is concerned, or
Yeah.
do you feel like we need a different insecticide on top of that?
Well, carbaryl, it will give you protection. It will give you like moderate protection. So it depends on how long you rely on the carbaryl. You know what I mean? If it is a long period, I wouldn't gamble just with the protection of carbaryl, and I would add something else. If it is a couple of days, probably you can take that risk. But I wouldn't trust a lot in the efficacy of carbaryl for Puncurculio.
All right, thank you. And I know we started catching a couple black stem borer about 2 weeks ago, so they are starting to fly in the Champlain Valley. Obviously, last week was so cool, we didn't see much activity, but certainly starting to be out there. So we appreciate your recommendations for keeping those under control as well.
Yeah, pay attention to that one because we have had like severe infestations in this area.
Sure. All right. So next we are going to be hearing from Dr. Kara Cox joining us from Geneva today. He's going to give us some updates on moving forward with our disease management over the next few weeks here. So Carrick, if you're still out there, we'll have you.
Yeah, we're still here. Let's take a look first at like one of the last places still have forecasting. And I'm kind of sort of, going a little bit beyond what these scope of the models do, but you don't want rain and you don't want temperatures favorable for apple scab, and we have both of those. So we might as well at least look at it. Chasey looks a little better, but you can see there's a lot of rain on the forecast coming for the weekend. No surprises there. Good many leaf wetness hours. If you're not having the infection right now, and some places are, if we pop over to Peru, you'll see like, oh gosh, yes, there's one for tomorrow. As long as things are pretty well covered, with the cold weather and the thinning and the extended wet temperatures, avoid the cap tan and stick to the mancozeb and the single sites. We'll talk about the different types of single sites that one could use. Fire blight is almost over for everyone else, but you're right in the thick of it right now. Hopefully Mike sent out that alert earlier that says spray anything with rat tail bloom or any with remaining bloom. And I think I moved the opened up some blossoms just in case you still had any. The model is turning off. but it's pretty gross fire blight weather up in your region through almost Saturday-ish. It's when it finally, or Saturday, or yeah, through about Saturday is when it finally calms down. Hopefully you have something on any last tissue that's out there. It's not, temperatures are high, a lot of leaf wetness hours. The possibility is there. The rest of the state looks pretty good. Taking a peek back at Peru, see if probably looks the same if I remember correctly. It wants to turn it off, but you can turn it back on just by picking any date in the month of May and like, oh, there it is. Same story, even in the Peru area. Really scary. It looks like the big one is today's the 29th, and that's why Mike sent out the message earlier about getting a strep spray on. Hopefully you're spraying strep instead of coming to this webinar. And you don't want anything. It's the 11th hour. You're almost through the goalpost. Just carry that football on through, and I think you'll survive fire blight this year. Let's see, moving to the slide type stuff. I'm going to scroll back up to our start slide, and we'll talk about where we are. Hopefully you're in the petal fall second cover. Switching over the swapping presenter view so it looks a little bit better. It's a lot of rain. We're sort of away from the 5 days of ascospore ejection because it's gone. We're moving into second cover, which used to be, first cover's 10 days after petal fall, second cover's 14 days after first. Now I feel like all the early covers should be a week after petal fall, particularly with this nasty rain. We're getting lots of rain, 5 inches or more than 5 days of leaf wetness. And now you're rotating through the rest of the remaining groups that you happen to have available. 7, just an example. Mirabis, it's stuff like Aprovia, the SDHIs, your group 11. Flint Extra Gem is another one in there. We'll see the table of fungicides in a bit. 3s if you still have them. And then you have Axios as another player that's only labeled on apple scab and powdery mildew. But right now, all the junk is coming at your orchards for the summer. You still have scab that could be a problem. You still have mildew that could be a problem. Cedar apple rust can be in there. These things are color-coded by the fungicides that are best against them. For the most part, the group 7s are great on scab. The Flint Extras. And what in Flint Extra is also included in Maravon and the Luna Sensation product, or group 11's great on mildew. It used to be that the 3s were great on mildew, but these group 11 seem to be really doing well now. And then Sevia, anything in the group 3 is going to destroy cedar apple rust. And we'll talk about these a bit. The other player that you could have in a situation like this is the apple blotch or the Marsanina, and the initial inoculum for fly specks, sooty blotch, and rots. I'll go into the details on those momentarily, and other scary things that you could end up seeing at this time. The good news is about Marsanina. If your leaves have so much apple scab on them, you're not going to get the Marsanina. Marsanina seems to be a bigger problem when we have an easier scab season altogether, which is something to think about. If it's low, there's no rain. There's not a lot of no rain. Be very careful with Cap 10 at this time of the year. Sometimes I want to like strike through it and just stick to the mancozeb. Great for rust. And if it's light, you can use a biopesticide liquids. If you're going full organic and you have the bad rain like you're currently experiencing, really like the Howler. It's a powder, but it does have pyrrolnitrin in it, which is like having a Scholar, which is one of your post-harvest fungicides that we get in apple. Stone fruits can get the AI in Scholar, but not apples. And so this sort of naturally produced one is a great option. The other one that we've really found a lot of good work with pre and black rots and bitter rots and stuff is the Oso polyoxin D. It's a legitimate antibiotic, and it's naturally produced and labeled for organic agriculture. And then, of course, if you're going the whole biological road and it's really light, maybe next week will be light and you can just use something lighter. The nice thing about including the biologicals at this time of year as your protectant with your single site fungicide is you get double duty on the fire blight. You're in fire blight risk right now. So if you were to put out Eco Swing, Stargus, and Double Nickel, I get pretty reasonable control of fire blight with those. And so if you're putting out there, I'll go ahead and do Axios, and I won't use my mancozeb, I'll put Double Nickel in it. Then you're getting scab, fire blight, and a whole bunch of other things all in one shot. Now, if you are seeing leaf lesions anytime from petal fall to second cover, you want to kind of burn them out, and you want to literally choke them out, if you will. There are fungicides that stop respiration. These will stop sporulation. The group 3s, like Sevia, they stop growth and will slow things down till they dry up. But these types of ones, the 711 kill. They're cyanide for fungi, and you kind of want to use one of these. If you see lesions, things are very bad at this point, and you'll use a Maravon or Luna Sensation to get them the 2-punch on their mitochondria and keep them from breathing and just burn them right out. Another option that you could do if you're feeling very anxious about this, and it's not bad because any leaf lesion now is very dangerous for your fruit in the future, is to spend one day and burn them out with a peroxide biopesticide oxidate 5.0. It kind of burns out the lesion, and then you give them a double burn with your 7-Elevens. And this time I mentioned some different ones. Excalia is another really nice group 7, very strong on scab, and Flint Extras also as well. Can you mix the peroxide, the biopesticide, the single site together? I don't know. I've got a bunch of trials where we're mixing oxidate and Axios. Nothing seems to be wrong with the trees, but I just don't know if they are if it's effective or if this peroxide oxidizes the fancy molecules in your single sites. The last thing you want to do is not get the benefit of putting in the fancy fungicides. So where we are in fire blight, we're right here with the perhexadione calcium pedifol in 2 weeks. And I'll mention these things, but the priority in this type of weather, I think you're not going to be as devastated by shoot blight. So make sure your thinning comes first. Make sure that your leaves are taking up any of the thinning PGRs long before the PGR that's going to stop the growth of the tree. If you put these things together, you could end up not doing what you intend to do with your thinner. So get through thinning first, and once that's accomplished, then you can worry about shoot blight in apples and apply it 6 ounces per 100 for the big ones. This is mostly assuming people are going to be using high density apples, such as my sad planting of Evercrisp that you see in the bottom, or you go the 2-in-1. You do it in the pedifol period in the 10 to 14 days later, but make sure that you're not having your apogee compete with your other PGRs for thinning. Do a nice job of thickening the cortical parenchyma. It will stop this type of invasion stuff from happening, and then shoot blight ooze and just spreading down the row and killing everything like in mine. If you get to a stage where you are seeing ooze, you can put out copper. It could cause fruit russet, but I would recommend one of those liquid coppers that has a low MCE, which is metallic copper equivalent. Might range from somewhere between 2 to 3 to 15%. In some of the heavier ones, but they're usually liquid. They'll spray, they'll wash right off. They're not going to have a lot of sticking powder, but not a lot of sticking powder means less russet. If it's cold and rainy and slow drying, don't put the copper on now. But if you want to avoid losing your entire cider apple operation, this is where copper can be good. Only thing it will do is it will kill the bacteria on the surface. So if there's ooze droplets hiding in this tree, the copper will destroy those. It doesn't stop the tissues that are infected with fire blight from making more ooze. The other thing that can happen is the terminals can grow beyond the copper residue. If I applied it this week and they were really active, they grow a whole bunch of new shoot, then you'll have to put more copper on again. So you can kind of use these sort of low-rate fixed copper programs, the lowest on the label. You'll see which ones are allowed for applications after bloom and sort of hit them 10 to 14 days. What else can we say about fire blight? If you do see it, remove it on a cool, dry day. Unfortunately, the middle of next week is hot. Hopefully it'll freeze down again. And if you happen to see fire blight, you always want to cut into last year's growth. Find last year's growth and then cut 12 inches back into that. That's going to give you your best avoidance on having this stuff move through and propagate the trees. The more active and smaller and high density the tree is, the faster the fire blight will move. If you already see it in the main scaffold, I would just remove it and get it out of the orchard. Can you rescue it? You can try. You just really need to move that Prohex up to a really high dose, dump it on there, wait 5 days for it to work, or whenever the tree seems to be very active, and then you'll have to prune it, and then you might have to do it again because the active pruning will stimulate new growth and cause the fire blight to move. What else is going on? I won't spend too much time talking about the others. We have cedar apple rust. This is a little different from apple scab because it only has one infection time. Apple scab can infect, cause sporulating lesions, and reinfect all summer long, but this one has to go back to a cedar before it ends up damaging the apples. This one will make a spore here that flies around and infects the leaves and the fruit of apples. And the fruit is where things get really dark. Usually early to bloom to around pedifol is when you can have this type of issue. It starts a little bit later. If you ever have Eastern red cedar and you see these things, you know your apples are at risk. The infections, you won't really see them now until later fruit development. You can see these fruit are quite big. This was taken at the Hudson Valley. They're pretty much ruined at this stage. They're malformed and they're covered with those bright yellow-looking lesions. Resistance exists. It's just not really the best. If you have Eastern red cedar nearby, you can kind of remove them to save the apples. What's the best fungicide? The DMI, the group 3 fungicides are great. That's why I mentioned them earlier. This is what the leaf lesions will look like on your leaves. If you see this, the damage is already done. You don't need to panic and spray fungicides now. A program of mancozeb is actually quite good, and using a lot of mancozeb may be one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of cedar apple rust. You put it with DMI, and you have the 1-2 punch that can't be beat when it comes to rust. A lot of the rust fungi that attack wheat and corn and sorghum heavily managed with DMIs, and that's why we have good DMIs in apples. Around the time somewhere between now and second cover to really get this. The leaf will make one spore type on the top, make one spore type on the bottom, but the one you're seeing on your fruit is this initial infection that comes from the cedar. Get rid of them. We don't really need to talk about the disease life cycle, but I will sort of put up this fungicide picture. Full rate of mancozeb is awesome, but if you don't do that, and because once you commit to a full mancozeb program, you can't really start switching back to the half according to the label. Half rate plus the single sites. I really highlighted those group 3s. Those are going to be the hammers for that. What about mildew? I've already started seeing primary infections. Now, these are from last year. These are buds that were infected and are now sort of bursting forth and making themselves very showy. And you might think, oh man, I need to do something. You do need to do something to protect the terminal leaves and to protect your fruit from getting russet. What you'll see now is these things will be sporulating. You can attempt to still burn them out using the same practices that I mentioned for apple scab a few minutes ago, but these will start now. I've seen them in Evercrest. I've seen them in Majona Golds. I've seen them in Ida Reds. They're all over the place. Sometimes Ida Red can be a little earlier, such as this flower cluster that looks normal, but it's actually covered with tons of powdery mildew. They'll infect your terminal leaves. They'll affect your developing shoot. They can't cause a true infection. These are like the plum curculio of fungi. All they will do is damage your fruit finish, and then you'll be very sad. They don't reproduce on the fruit, but they can make these sort of netting type russeted injuries. They're failed infections. It likes a lot of humidity, and it likes warm, dry weather, but the problem is if you have a lot of humidity, even if it's cooler, you can still favor these mildews. I'm seeing mildew everywhere. A lot of susceptible cultivars. This will run rampant unless unchecked, and you can kind of manage it. The key period is between now and kind of 3rd and 5th cover. Doesn't seem to be a lot of fungicide resistance. The group 3s used to be really good, but now the group 11s, I got to fix that. So I'm going to correct these errors on the fly and then make sure you're seeing the right thing. Yeah, are much better. Group 7 is not as strong. They can be effective. Some are better than others. Sulfur is good, but be careful at this thinning time with using sulfur, particularly the liquid one. That can do some trouble. We won't really fuss with the disease cycle. Captan, mancozeb do nothing for this stuff. You really want to focus on these type in there. And that QOI is the real strong one. 7 to 10 days, bloom to 3rd cover. That's when you're going to get it out there. If you can put a little sulfur out, the dry sulfur, you'll do fine, but sometimes they're best included with your protectant or something else. There's not a lot of models for this. There's some, but in this case, sulfur is good early on, and as you leave this period into now, the 3 and 11s are the best, and that sort of takes us a little bit into where we are today. In terms of materials, Axios is great. Tessera's is good. It's one of the better ones, but I've graded out because it's not allowed on Long Island, but you can still use them. These aren't as good on mildew, good on scab. Summer diseases, these are where all of these other aspects come into play and their sort of level of success. Group 11s. And that's why in some of the earlier content, I'm always like, hold off on using them all, because now you're going to manage everything with these. If you burn through all your groups, you're a little bit in trouble. But thank goodness we have a group 52 that you can use. This is also the time when a couple other problems come, and then I will turn it right off. Fly speck sooty blotch, bitter and black rot, white rot, they're affecting our leaves. They could be causing latent infections on the fruit. They will start in early from bloom to petal fall. The petal fall is a sort of susceptible timing where these things can get a foothold in early fruit development and then show up later when the fruit starts putting on sugar. You can get infections later in pre-harvest rains, wounding, and herbicides, but right now, what the early fruit infections is what we're kind of looking at. The other problem that can show up and only rarely shows up in wet petal falls is moldy core. And this is a fungal colonization of the seed area. And there's sort of latent infections. You don't know anything's happening now, but then an area around the seed coats gets covered with mycelium of a bunch of junk fungi, and the marketer throws all your apples out. They could look gorgeous on the outside, but then have this moldy core in the middle, and it's a huge mess. It's gross. It's not really a health concern. And it's mostly fungi that really don't cause problems in apple, except for penicillium and Botryopsphera. And you don't see it until harvest. So that's another reason to keep strong on the single sites right now in this really wet weather. And because this could lead to fresh market load rejections. The other problem we see sometimes, or that gets confused with moldy core, and this will be the last thing I talk about, is the callus core. It's white, undifferentiated callus tissue around seed cavities. It sometimes happens when there are physiological concerns due to a lot of water. This is it on Fuji right there. It looks like mycelium, but I'll pick it up, put it under the microscope. It'll be these firm crystalline tissue. It's not like mycelium. No health concern, no off flavor, no off, looks gross, but you can, and people will reject your apples if they see it. They'll say, oh, it's moldy core, and then they'll throw all your stuff away. It's a physiological problem mistaken for moldy core. It doesn't cause an issue, but something to be mindful of if you happen to see it. With that, I'll just end since we're almost out of time, or out of time. And I'll stop the share.
All right. Thank you very much, Carrick. Appreciate your suggestions for us as always. I will say powdery mildew is certainly one that's been creeping up here over the last couple of years. So nice to see those recommendations again. Certainly on all the big varieties, Honeycrisp, Cortland, Evercrisp, it's all that primary inoculum is really starting to show up
It's
now.
really
So
getting there. Yeah, we did some studies, and it seems that if you go really hard in this part of the season now, your primary next year could be better. So all the more reason to try to keep some of those single sites in until terminal bud set, because the last thing you want is a whole bunch of inoculum to infect bud tissue for next year.
all right, great. Thank you. Are there any questions for Carrick before we move on to our next speaker?
Good.
All right. I think we are good. Thank you, Carrick. All right, everybody. Next up, we are going to be hearing from Dr. Anna Wallace, and I'm going to share my screen for her, and she'll walk us through her slides. So just give me a second here, Anna. I'll go ahead and get those up on the screen for you, and you'll be good to go.
Thanks, Mike. And actually, before you share the slides for me, I'm gonna do something else really quick. So you've got a minute before that.
All right.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for everybody still staying on. I know it's the end of like a couple hours of being in front of a computer, so I'll try to make it short and sweet. I'm here mostly, I think, to remind you how important it is to be scouting and some of the resources that are available to help support your scouting. If you've been doing it for a couple of generations on your farm, or if you're training somebody new, I think all of this is really important information and really valuable resources that you can be using. And so I thought I'm out here and practicing what I preach today. I've been out scouting as part of a research project where we have sites in both Eastern and Western New York. So I wanted to start by sharing some of the things that we're seeing at this point in the season in real life. So Mike, I don't know if you can stop sharing the slides just so there's like a little bit of a bigger screen for 1 second. And I was going to turn my camera around so you can see some of the things that I've been looking at. I'm out here with my counter and my hand lens. And I think one of the most important things about the work that we're doing when we're scouting is we're early detection, rapid response, either in this season or in future seasons. And just having pattern recognition. So remembering what things look like so you can quickly identify it in the field and then have this rapid response. And so we're seeing already some powdery mildew. I don't know how well you can see some of that, the powdery sporulation on some leaves there. We're seeing a lot of that, the primary, and also lots of secondary infections already. I am finding the first scab lesions in both Eastern and Western New York. really hard to see, especially if it's like a shiny leaf, kind of like an oil slick or something fuzzy. And then this next leaf, the very, very first lesions from rust are starting to show up, these tiny pinprick rust lesions, both on this leaf and on this leaf that's been torn up by a caterpillar also. But looking really closely for these teeny tiny lesions so you can detect them early is really important. Also, Andreas mentioned we're seeing some rosy apple aphids, and so this curled up leaf, if you peel it apart and curled up underneath, you might see some of those aphids on the underside of the leaf, or there's skeletons in there. Apple leaf curling midge, here's a nice one that is actually turning color, turning red. It doesn't always do that. Sometimes it's just a brittle curling on the margin of the leaf, but sometimes it turns red like that as well. We're seeing some early curculio damage, and so here's a little sort of a fingernail injury on the top fruitlet there, and then as the fruit expands, it sort of looks more like a fan shape, and we're seeing plenty of that in places, especially in the Hudson Valley. We had some really warm weather right before bloom when they started to be active, before people got their insecticides on. This fruitlet has some plum curculio and also some apple sawfly. So another thing to be looking for. Another early insect is your tarnished plant bug. So this one has a little dimple in it where that piercing sucking mouth part would have fed on a really early flower bud or fruitlet. And then you might also find some beneficials. So I found a couple syrphid fly larvae today. There's syrphid flies and lacewing larvae that are great beneficials, eat a lot of other pests. So lots of stuff to be looking for out there. And despite it being cold, there's a lot of stuff active. So just really important to be out there in your orchard. I know everybody on this call is very vigilant in their orchard, but lots of good things to be looking for. So now, Mike, if you would share my slides, the next thing I wanted to do is just remind you of some of the resources that are available. If you're reviewing this information, or like I said, if you are training somebody new on your farm, things you can share with them. Also, I'm happy to talk with anyone that is learning the ropes and wants some more support in scouting and monitoring. And actually, let's skip past this one. This is a duplicate for later in the slide set that I sent you. So a lot of resources that I think you're probably familiar with. The top right there is Apple IPM for Beginners. I have a couple of hard copies of this if you would like a copy. There's also a stone fruit IPM for Beginners that's sort of a simplified introduction to IPM and fact sheets that give a cursory overview of the insect and diseases that are most important. The Cornell Tree Fruit Pest Management Guidelines, I apologize, that is still not actually available. The author guidelines were distributed to authors, and they're working on getting the website up so that you can purchase those. I know at this point in the season, it is extremely late, but PSEP, the group that publishes the guidelines, are just so understaffed and have so many responsibilities at this point. They're doing the best they can. There's a lot of work behind the scenes to hopefully speed up that process. So if you have feedback about that publication, please share it with us, and we're taking that into account right now. Also, if you're looking for more sustainable organic guidelines, Cornell does have an organic apple guidelines that is very useful, not just for certified organic, but also for more sustainable management. And then if you're really into the identification of the pests and the insects and the diseases, this tree fruit field guide is one of my favorite resources. So you can purchase one of those field guides online, or feel free to send photos to me or to Mike, and we will often page through that publication to help find an answer for you. I guess you could move to the next slide, Mike. And then there are a bunch of videos and other apps or online resources that are available to help you. There's this Apple IPM Intensive Workshop that are a series of short videos that Julie Carroll, Art Agnello, other people, faculty at Cornell have produced. I think it was recorded as one of the first sort of Zoom webinars before we got so well acquainted with it during the pandemic. So those are really excellent series of videos that help teach the basics of many insect and disease pests. And then there are apps like My IPM is one of my favorite apps that is continually updated that provides information on identification and management of different apple pests as well as other fruit pests. Mike, next slide. And then another really important resource are these tree fruit fact sheets. I think many people are familiar with the Cornell fruit fact sheets that summarize insect and disease pests. They are these really great PDFs that have been distributed in person, and also they're buried in this e-commons database online that's really hard to navigate and find and doesn't turn up in a web search. So we're in the process of moving all of those fact sheets to online web pages on the Cornell IPM website. And so we have more than 15 up already, and we are working on more. So hopefully that will be a quicker way for you to identify information about different insect and disease pests in tree fruit as well as other fruit. So you could scan that QR code or visit this website or just type in Cornell IPM fact sheets and it will take you to the right place. So that's a work in progress that we'll continue to add things to. Next slide. Last year, we also did some virtual scout trainings. Janet, Mike, and I broadcasted live from our different regions of the state, and we recorded those webinars, sort of walking through in real time how we're doing scouting and monitoring. And you can watch those on the Cornell IPM YouTube channel at that link. This year, we are working on some shorter videos, and so 2-minute videos that can summarize each pest that we're monitoring and scouting for. And we're hoping to do that sometime this summer. So wish us luck. If there is a pest that you'd really like to see on your wish list, send it to me so we can make sure to include it because we're writing those videos right now. Next slide. And I also teach an online course, BF 224, through the Cornell Small Farms program. The Cornell Small Farms program is a great program. If you don't know about it already, they have a really extensive suite of online courses, just continuing education courses, so no college credits associated with it. But you register for these courses, and then they're often evening courses that you can take in real time and watch the webinar, or you can take them asynchronously at your own pace. And so this course, Tree Fruit Scouting, we try to walk through some of the fundamental monitoring and scouting technique, identification and biology of the key insect diseases, and then a little bit on wildlife and weeds. And Carrick has helped present in that, Monique has, Andreas has helped, and Lynn Sosnowski. So I think we have a great amount of information and expertise to share with you. If you are like a new person that is learning this kind of stuff, or you're training someone on your farm, like I've said, or people that have taken this course in 1 year, you're allowed to take it again in the subsequent year for free. And so hopefully in the future, I'll be moving it completely to a free course. And so I would hope it would be a nice refresher leading up to the season. It's in February and March as you're getting ready to do scouting in your own orchard. Next slide. And I think this is my last slide, or getting close. If you aren't able to monitor on your own farm, I've created this resource, this tree fruit pest monitoring network with indicator locations throughout the state. Mike and Janet and a few consultants and other growers are contributing to this network where we're monitoring and trapping for a few different key pests, including codling moth, Oriental fruit moth, oblique-banded leaf roller, apple maggot. We're also doing some apple leaf curling midge this year with the intention of understanding the life cycle in New York. And so Andreas was talking a little bit about that earlier, making sure that we understand the different generations and timings in New York and seeing if it lines up with the Canadian model and if we can use that or tailor it specifically for New York. So we're starting to work on that a little bit already with this monitoring network. And so you can navigate to this website that Dan Olmsted, who manages NUA, has helped me set up. It's a map with a graph that you can dig into the data. You can select your specific site of interest and see all of the trap captures for that site for this year as well as last year. And so you can keep up to date on what's going on around the state as far as these key insect pests. And if you're interested in contributing, I have some funding to provide traps to people around the state and help get people up to speed on how to do that work. And many of the projects that I've talked about, including this one, has been made possible by an ARDP grant. So I'm really grateful to have the support, dedicated support to be able to offer these things. In the past, I think we've done a lot of monitoring and scouting just as part of program activities. And so we have dedicated funding to be able to run this work right now. Next slide. Okay, maybe this is the last one. And so if you don't know already, we have this podcast that Monique Rivera produces every week during the growing season, where she is interviewing people about different topics pertaining to New York apple growers. And then she and Carrick give updates on entomology and pathology for the season. And then I give a summary of sort of the trap captures from the monitoring network. And so I hope that you'll join us by listening to that wherever you listen to podcasts. We have it on both Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and I think it's other places as well. So I think next slide, and hopefully we're getting to the end. Yep. And so I'm happy to take any questions, or in the interest of time, maybe we'll transition to the next speaker. And please do reach out with questions or send photos. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to get pictures of pests and try to help identify what the problem is so we can find the right solution. Thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you so much, Anna. Any questions for Anna before we move on? Well, Anna, we appreciate the pest monitoring network. I hope the ones that we're doing up in the Champlain Valley are making it on okay. And it's nice having the heads up from the Hudson Valley of what you're seeing. So we appreciate having your foresight from down that direction. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to have your help too, Mike. Thanks.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and just shift a few things here. All right, well, so I have a couple of final things to say before we wrap up here. So I always kind of like to say, you know, I can hold people hostage at the end of my own meetings and talk about weed management for a little bit. So I don't have any slides prepared for you, so I figured I'd just talk off the cuff. You know, looking around the Champlain Valley at this point, I think a lot of folks did get their early season weed management on. A lot of people got their pre-emergence on, and also got a post-emergent burn down on too, to take care of whatever had already come up. So herbicide strips are looking really good at this point, though we are starting to see some of our perennial weeds starting to peek through. So in particular, looking at Canada thistle starting to pop up. Some of our grasses are starting to grow through as well. We also are starting to see things like hedge bindweed and white campion starting to pop up as well. So some of those perennials are usually later emerging and are a little bit more difficult to control because they do have those really strong root systems. So it's really something that we're going to need more than just a burn down to take care of. So I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the systemic products that we've been trialing and would recommend for your use as you get into sort of the June, July timing. So our ARDP project that we had been doing the past 2 years was using Stinger for the control of Canada thistle. And we found that a single application right around this timing, sort of that petal fall to first cover, worked really nicely in suppressing Canada thistle for the rest of the season. So definitely one that I would consider in your portfolio if you do struggle in a couple of spots with Canada thistle. We're using the 2/3 of a pint per acre rate, right about that petal fall first cover timing. Really, you want to hit it as the thistle starts to grow vertically, but while it'll still fit under the boom. And then it should do a pretty nice job of controlling that regrowth throughout the rest of the season. And we are finding that with that application, if you then follow up that following season, you can really get into a nice system where you're suppressing that Canada thistle pretty nicely. Some other materials to also think about would be for 2,4-D. I think you might think about 2,4-D rather than the Stinger, because Stinger does have a fairly limited range of species that it will control. It's really going to control thistles, some of the other asters, and some of the nightshades, but otherwise that's pretty much the bulk of what it's controlling for you. 2,4-D will give you more of a broad spectrum control against other broadleaves. So we trialed it against bindweed last year. We didn't have great results with it, but it did a nice job with some of our other perennial broadleaves, like our dandelion, like our thistles. Something that could be nice to use. That one can't be used at bloom, so again, you're getting into a good timing for when you can use it. And for the most part with that material, we want to be getting that on essentially as those perennial weeds start to bud, start to bloom. That's when they're going to be most effective, because that's when the material is going to actually be absorbed by that plant and work its way down into the root systems, which for our perennials, we really need to get it down into the roots for it to really do its job at suppressing and ultimately, hopefully, controlling those weeds. I also wanted to mention glyphosate. That is still a really good, strong material that we can use for a lot of different perennial weeds, including our grasses. So with that material, we generally like to use that, later in the season, again, preferably as things are starting to come into bloom, because that will be getting it transported down into the roots. Generally, from previous work and anecdotal suggestions from some of my colleagues, we usually don't like to go with glyphosate much beyond the solstice. Up here in the Champlain Valley, I like to go a little bit later, so I usually say right around Independence Day is how late I would recommend going with it. The reasoning for that is it'll be more effective the later in the season you go, but we do have some concerns about tree health and tree injury from later applications. So we find that July 4th timing seems to be a nice compromise and should do a nice job of picking up things like quackgrass and a lot of your other perennials that you might have. Then on top of that, of course, we have still our other burn down materials. So your paraquat, your glufosinate will burn back what is already coming up, but again, won't get down into the root system. So just burning down the plant parts that it actually physically contacts. And so with that, I do want to segue a little bit. If you would like to learn more about weed control and some alternative weed control products, we do have a upcoming meeting that's going to be on June 25th down in Poughkeepsie. So a little bit of a drive from the Champlain Valley. But at that meeting, Anna's going to be showing one of our ARDP sites where we are using mulch along with organic herbicides to manage the herbicide strip as a comparison to a conventional weed management program there. And I'm also going to be talking about our trial in the Champlain Valley, where we are using a mechanical weeder to replace the contact materials. You can also learn more about that project in July. On July 17th, we're going to have a field afternoon up in Chazy. So we're going to talk about some weed management there, looking mostly at the mechanical weeding. We're also going to have a look at our Exceed trials. So late thinning at 20 millimeters with Exceed. We'll be able to look at that material on Gala, New York 1, and Honeycrisp. We're also going to have Jason Londo up to talk about some of his decline work. We'll take a look at our 2021 rootstock trial. And we're also going to hear from Yosef Al-Shaf, who's going to talk about some of his work looking at rootstock impacts on soft scald. So it'll be interesting to hear what he's finding there. So that is going to be on July 18th. And we'll be getting more information about that and other events in the not too distant future. So with all of that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap things up unless anybody has any burning weed questions that they'd like to ask. And if not, you certainly know where to find me. We are going to get this recording up probably by tomorrow morning. It should be in tomorrow's alert, along with a summary of our thinning recommendations from today. So good luck with your thinning. Good luck through the next few weeks of your pest season and the rest of the growing season as a whole. And we will see you around. So thank you for joining us today.